Hi, I'm Rachel Aiello,
And I'm Nik Nanos.
and welcome to Trendline. So the COVID vaccine is coming, Nick. Our vaccine passport's going to be next. It's shaping up to be a hot topic.
I think absolutely, because as soon as the vaccines start happening, people are going to think about, hey, what can I do? Or what can I do if I have a vaccination or not? And do I have a passport? Will I need a passport in order to travel and to go to hockey games, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it's been fascinating over the last week seeing all the movement on the vaccine rollout front, and it's prompted us to be able to start having this conversation about what the future is going to look like. And I think we are getting a glimpse of what that might be from what's happening right now in Israel and New Zealand.
עם התו הירוק הדלתות פשוט נפתחות לפניכם. תוכלו לצאת למסעדות.
Of course, as seen there in Israel's green doors to freedom, basically, it's only made possible through proof of vaccination. So do you think it's an effective strategy to encourage people to get the jab by saying, you need to show that you've gotten it in order to do all of these new normal things?
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, we have to tell people to get the vaccination, because the greater the number of people that get jabbed, the better it is for everyone. We always hear about herd immunity. But I think what's missing, and I don't want to sound like an old person, Smokey the Bear. Remember Smokey the Bear? Do you remember Smokey the Bear? You don't. Okay, anyways.
My parents might.
10 seconds on Smokey the Bear. Smokey the Bear, public service announcement, famous in the 1970s, talked about making sure that there weren't forest fires caused by campers and stuff like that. So I think we need some kind of, what do you think? Maybe some type of public service thing?
So my generation's version would be the don't you put it in your mouth. So the Canadian government version now would be instead of, don't take strange objects from strange people, it's make sure you roll up your sleeve. Here are the basics, FYIs, general public information. It's time to get your shot.
Yeah, and you know what? It makes sense, right, Rachel? Because if we're at war, we need a campaign. There's got to be a campaign to mobilize. We've got to mobilize people. And now's the time to mobilize, because we got to bring people together, get them vaccinated, and then fight this pandemic so that we can get all back to normal.
So something to keep an eye on, I guess, as the availability of more vaccines are there. I'm sure the government's going to want to start to signal, probably didn't want to do it too soon, saying, hey, go get your shot, except LOL, you can't. So we'll touch on this a bit more and dig deeper into that vaccine passport conversation. It's a really fascinating thing, so stick around for that. But first, Nik, the budget. We learned this week it's not going to be in March. It's going to be more than 2 years that will have gone past since we've had an official federal budget. And you've got some new numbers on who Canadians are trusting right now when it comes to the economy.
Oh, exactly. We just finished a survey for Bloomberg News, and we asked a simple question: which of the federal parties do you trust to manage federal finances? And the Liberals came out on top at 33%, Conservatives 24%. Of note, 26%, or 1 out of every 4, said they don't trust anyone. And if we were to sum this up, if you're a conservative, Rachel, if someone happens to support the Conservatives, you're probably clutching your chest thinking, how could the Conservative Party of Canada be behind Justin Trudeau and the Liberals? And in my experience, the thing is when the Conservatives are not strong or not perceived to be strong on managing government finances, it's hard for them to win an election, because that's usually part of their core brand. It's kind of like, I guess, Justin Trudeau is eating Erin O'Toole's lunch when it comes to fiscal responsibility, but still a quarter of Canadians are up for grabs or just turned off because they don't think anybody could do a good job.
So this is fascinating to me, Nik, because Conservatives traditionally are able to own the territory around the economy, and they're known as kind of being, that's their bread and butter issue. So what does this mean for Conservative leader Erin O'Toole and his party going into this time where the economy is going to be a hot topic?
Well, he's got to get out on this, because he's got to build his economic credentials. He's got to put out his plan that is different from the Liberals. And you know what, Rachel, if we go into the polling time machine, when I knew that Stephen Harper was in trouble when he was running against Justin Trudeau, is when Justin Trudeau was tied with Stephen Harper on managing the economy. Like Justin Trudeau, a guy who was not prime minister, didn't have a lot of economic background. And when Stephen Harper's numbers started to slide, when he should be strong, it was an indicator. So if you're a Liberal strategist, you might be looking at these numbers thinking, man, if we have a good budget, perhaps we do want an election, because how long will this advantage last? And if you're a Conservative, you've got to pivot to talking about managing the government finances, what the economic and fiscal plan is for the future. Because right now it looks like the red team has a little bit of an advantage on this one.
So I wonder then, thinking about what's been going on Parliament Hill lately, they seem to be throwing various topics and issues against the wall, trying to figure out what's going to stick, perhaps maybe trying to see if they can get traction on vaccines or China or ethics instead of the economy because of the sentiment that they're getting internally as well. This in mind, is there still room for them to turn things around?
For the Conservatives, 100%, because they're only 5 points back. That's not a big. They're still in the game. 100, they're still in the game. They're only 5 points back of the Liberals. But I think what the Conservatives are trying to do is to disrupt the Liberal narrative. It's hard for them to criticize, like for any opposition party to criticize the government for being generous with stimulus, with trying to buy more vaccines, trying to get, all that stuff. It's something that's hard to criticize because Canadians want support. They need support to get through the pandemic, and they want vaccinations. So what we're seeing is an opposition party that's looking to pivot to other things. We also have the Kielburgers. Man, last time they were in the news, it was bad news for Justin Trudeau because the liberal advantage went from majority to a dead heat. I'm sure the Conservatives want to kind of, put that out there in order to try to disrupt the Liberal trend line and to remind some Canadians of things that happened in the past that many Canadians were disappointed with.
So the Conservatives have a policy convention coming up next week, and I'm sure that he's going to have his ears to the ground as much as you can on a Zoom conference, hearing from the grassroots in the party about where they want to go, what the direction's going to be. Is it going back to his election campaign, true blue Conservative, or is it trying to stake out the government on certain issues? So I think we'll watch this file for the next little while and see where they land and which O'Toole we're going to get going forward. But speaking on public opinion, there was something else I wanted to pick your brain on, Nik. We keep having this conversation about how the provinces are doing with COVID, and a lot of that's been on the vaccine. But you've got some new numbers, kind of a report card, state of the union across the country. How are the different provinces doing with this pandemic at this current point?
Well, if you remember, Rachel, when we talked about this last time and it was in the news on CTV, it was pretty dismal scores. I think the provinces only scored 5.5 out of 10, and the federal government we will call it a dismal 4.7. What we've seen now, a month later, on I'll call it the tracking report card that we're now doing, is that confidence in the provinces and the vaccination rollout has increased from 5.5 to 6.4 out of 10. So that's good. Confidence in the federal government has increased from 4.7 to 5.7. So it looks like the trend is up and positive. Atlantic Canada still an outlier, and I say that in the most positive, nicest way, because if you're in Atlantic Canada, you're more likely to think that your province is doing a reasonably good job compared to grumpy Canadians in the rest of the country. So it looks like, so the big question is 6.4 and 5.7 out of 10 good? Answer, no. It's okay, but it's better than it was.
Yeah, grumpy, lockdown, cold Canadians who haven't seen their friends in a while.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into this vaccine passport conversation a bit more. Personally, I think it's fascinating, and there's a whole ethics conversation to be had as well. But we know now the federal government is actively having these conversations with other countries. Here's a bit from Health Minister Patty Hajdu on CTV's Question Period.
We're certainly working on the idea of vaccine passports with our G7 partners. I was on a call with my G7 health minister counterparts just a couple of weeks ago, and that is a very live issue, Evan. Of course, the IATA, the International Association of Transportation, is looking at exactly that. What kind of evidence or documents do people have to provide in order to resume international travel?
So, Nik, here we're learning that there are active, live, ongoing conversations with Canada and other countries about what kind of vaccine passport is going to be in place. And for everyone listening, this is specifically international travel. This is whether or not you can come into Canada or go to Italy or anywhere else. And so it seems that the federal government is part of these conversations, but the health minister isn't really staking out a position on whether Canada is for this, is going to do one to match. But with other countries coming out and saying they're going to require some sort of proof of vaccination to come visit, what pressure does that put on the federal government?
Oh, it's going to put significant pressure on the federal government, because especially when you think about the United States, actually, that's going to be one of the, they're not only our key trading partner, it's the busiest border, and it's the border that Canadians are most likely to cross. So any discussions with the United States will be critical. And why this is so important is because, according to the latest survey that we've done, about 8 out of every 10 Canadians say that they are definitely or probably going to get vaccinated. I think about 3% have reported they've already received the jab. So just think, 8 out of every 10 will have the vaccination. Then the question is, if any of them want to go on vacation, if any of them need to travel for work, is it going to be more complicated, or there will be some kind of system where we cooperate with a lot of our key trading and travel partners in order to give it some coherence, as opposed to, the last thing we want are kind of horror stories at the border where, people's paperwork are not in place and that we're not synced up with a lot of the key countries that many Canadians travel to.
Right. Or even, well, why is it fair that I need to show vaccination if I want to go to XYZ country, but anybody could come here? I think part of the hesitation in the federal government having this conversation seems to be they still don't have a lot of vaccines, so they don't want to preempt this and create a have and have not society where our grandparents and elderly people can go to Cancun or wherever, well deserved after the last year. But I think they probably wanted to wait until this is a bit more of an equitable situation. But I do wonder if this is a cat or the mouse situation. Should we be showing, hey, look how great your life can be if you get the vaccine and incentivize people? Or does it become a bit of a coercive thing where, oh, well, you're making me get the vaccine before I can go back to normal. Is that fair? Do you have any sense of how Canadians feel about, is it a mandatory or by de facto what we can and can't do mandatory request?
Yeah. Well, the big question will be for those 15% of Canadians who say that they're probably not or definitely not going to take the vaccine. What is it? How do they feel about potentially being outliers in when it comes to travel, and so it just makes it much more complicated. And then how much is the government willing to accommodate or not accommodate Canadians who decide not to get vaccinated? The other interesting thing is that that when we ask Canadians about mandatory vaccinations, there's only a minority that actually believe that vaccinations should be mandatory. So Canadians would like to get vaccinated, but they're respectful of the views of other people in general. But I think this is going to be tricky, because if we need a passport to go someplace else, then how do we, to your point, are there reciprocal privileges allowed to other countries, and who are they? Then when it comes to Canadians being safe in Canada, Canadians are going to want, as they start to normalize, to know that if they go to a cultural event, right, a symphony performance, that they're safe, right? Not just respecting the social distancing rules and the guidance from public health authorities, but also who's getting vaccinated. So it's going to be very tricky. I think it's going to be very, very controversial for many people.
And I guess this kind of brings me to the other side of this. This is a international travel passport, but then we also have the question of what internal domestic vaccine passport criteria are we going to see? And if the vaccine rollout is any example, we could be seeing a patchwork of rules where it's different in every province. Some provinces have kind of started to have this conversation and say, yes, no, maybe, noting there are already certain restrictions on things for people who are vaccinated, schools, for example. But I'm wondering how important it's going to be, A, for this to be a united policy across Canada, and B, shouldn't we be having this conversation as a society at this point? If this is going to be this is our life going forward. I understand the vaccine rollouts still got a bit of a runway, but I think this should be probably the next big conversation Canadians are having about what this new normal looks like. Can I go to a wedding? Can I go to the movies? What do I need to be able to do those things?
Oh, absolutely. And you know what, Rachel, I agree with you 100%. We should have been having this conversation last year because we knew it was coming. And, the last thing we need is a political Hunger Games or a pandemic Hunger Games where, like Atlantic Canada, they have the Atlantic Canada bubble, which is great if you're in Atlantic Canada. But if you have family or friends in Atlantic Canada, it's kind of like, oh, man, it is complicated to travel to see your friends, colleagues, family if they happen to live in Atlantic Canada and you're not in that bubble. So the last thing we need are regional bubbles. So to your point, we need the federal government to step up, because the federal government is the natural convener to bring the provinces together on how kind of the vaccination rollout, the rules of engagement pan out across the country, because, you know, the last thing we need is an uneven playing field, province to province, workplace to workplace, public place to public place across different regions, because it'll just make for a mismatch, and it won't be good from a public health perspective either if there's a lot of differences between what the provinces are doing.
Right. And I think it feeds back into that public confidence in the vaccination conversation as well. And people can start to plan out their lives going forward. Okay, so we'll watch this. I think for sure this is going to be a conversation we have again as things unfold. But there was another aspect I wanted to touch on, and this is, again, one of those, how are Canadians faring in the pandemic situations and how things have gone for them. So we're calling this, I guess, your positive takeaway, maybe not the main takeaway, but a little happy tidbit to leave people with.
It's the brighter side of polling. Maybe that's what we'll call it. I don't know. Rachel,
Okay.
we're going to have a discussion on what we're going to call this. We don't want to call it Happy Minute, but, you know, we, in one of the questions that we've been asking Canadians over the last while, we asked them how likely or unlikely they are to miss a major payment. And back in March, quite significant, 18% of Canadians said that they were likely or somewhat likely to miss a major payment, like rent, mortgage payment, that kind of stuff. That's dropped to 6%. So it looks like the stimulus is helping on that front. And the other piece of good news, the other bright spot, has to do with consumer confidence, where we're seeing consumer confidence return back to where it was before the pandemic. And, you know, we know from our research that Canadians have been taking anything extra that they have, paying down their debts, putting it in savings. So I think there's a hope now, as the vaccinations get rolled out, that people will be able to do the things that they did before, see their loved ones, engage in cultural activities, shop, all that kind of stuff. Hopefully, as the vaccinations are successfully distributed across the country.
Right. And we'll keep watching to see if in the coming federal budget, that stimulus and some of those supports keep up, because as we know, it's still going to be a little while before we're out of this. But I agree. I think if our listeners or viewers have any suggestions on what we should kind of brand this little bit, let us know. And on that note, Nik, where can people find you if they want to offer their pitches or suggestions on how we should frame things going forward?
Send me a note on Twitter at Nik, N-I-K, Nanos. Or if you want some stats, visit the Nanos website at www.nanos.co.
Great. And I will also take your pitches for what we should call our bright spot. I'm on Twitter at Aiello, and you can find Trendline on CTVNews.ca, the CTV News YouTube account, and everywhere you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening.